I want to do a short video on the book of Job because I think the book of Job is one of the most important books in the Bible, responding to one of the most challenging, difficult questions that we have as human beings. And that is, how can there be a good God with so much evil and suffering in the world? Often called the problem of pain or the problem of evil, summarized in the word theodicy. That means, how can there be a good God and unjust suffering? Now, the book of Job responds to that challenge, but not with a philosophical treatise like a philosopher would write, nor is it a sermon like a prophet would preach, but the book of Job responds by telling a story. In fact, the way the book of Job is kind of laid out, we want to get into that, it's laid out like you're watching a drama, like theater. And so we should picture ourselves seated in this theater with this drama of the book of Job going on stage. And so as we sit there, we see the curtain open up, and it opens up with this righteous man. And we see him doing all these righteous good things. There's nothing about his life that would lead us to believe that this man needs a wake-up call. He's wealthy and wise and generous and good. He's a great father, in fact, so good that when his children would get together, his adult children would get together to celebrate their birthdays, and maybe they partied too hard, and he's concerned that maybe they cursed God in that moment or did something shameful. Even though he doesn't know it, he still makes sacrifices for them. So he goes over and above of being a good man. And yet then the curtain closes and the curtain opens, and we're in heaven's courtroom, in the courts of heaven, and God is on his throne, and he's surrounded by all the holy ones, all the angels and spiritual beings, and the fallen angel, the devil, comes into the Lord's presence. And as the drama plays out, God asks the devil a question. What are you doing? What have you been doing? He says, I've been roaming the world. And Job, or the Lord asks, have you considered Job? If you're going to be going around tempting people and challenging people, have you considered Job? And it's a strange question, but remember, this is a drama being played out on stage. And we don't understand exactly what's going on here, but the devil says, well, no, I haven't. And so the Lord allows him to challenge Job, because the devil says, well, of course he's doing well. You've blessed him with good finances and good family and good health and all these things. But if you take any of your blessings away, you would see that Job's faith in you and his trust in you is conditional on your blessings. And so God allows the devil to take these things away. Now, unbeknownst to Job, this is what's going on in heaven's courtroom. And so the curtain closes again, and the curtain opens up, and there's Job. And Job, one after another, gets these messengers that come into the scene and report to him that he's lost everything. He's lost his wealth, he's lost his animals, and unfortunately, the saddest part is he's lost his children, that they've died in an accident. And that scene ends with Job, still a very blameless man, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And so even in his suffering, he responds properly. Probably the best response that you can imagine when you're facing suffering, that I don't understand this. God gave me these things and he's taken them away. He must have a reason. Then we go back into the heaven's courtroom, the next scene, and we see the devil challenging again, saying, well, of course he's being faithful, because you just took away his stuff. But if you actually inflict Job with pain, then Job will give up his trust in you, his faith in you. And so the Lord allows Job to be inflicted even more. And now it's his health, and he's deteriorating physically. And everything's going wrong with his body. And it's at that moment that the curtains close again and the curtains open up, and Job has 3 so-called friends that come and visit him. And in this scene, they just sit there, not saying anything. And this is the best thing that they do in the whole book. Really, this is what God would have us do with those who are suffering. Not respond right away, but to just sit with people in their suffering and mourn with them. But then they start to speak. And they speak in turn. And this middle section of the book. It's the largest section of the book. Most of the chapters are dealing with these friends, and they all speak. And again, not it's poetry. It's Hebrew poetry. That's why this is kind of played out like a Shakespearean play. It's all very poetic. So you have Job. You picture Job on center stage, and then one of the friends comes out, and I believe Eliphaz is first. And Eliphaz is more of a mystic, and he's trying to respond. He sees Job suffering, and he seems to start with kind of having a little bit of compassion, very small amount of compassion, and he tries to answer to the problem of theodicy, the problem of evil with a mystical experience. He describes a dream that he has, and this mystical experience, and that God revealed to him that there's something wrong with Job, and that if he would just repent and change, then all these problems would go away. So he thinks that he can explain the problem of evil with a mystical experience, with a dream. And Job responds to him that I haven't done anything wrong, at least not specifically to deserve this. I don't care what kind of dream you have. That's not what I'm experiencing. In fact, he says something about his friends that I think is really, really good. In Job chapter 6, he says, "Anyone who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. But my brothers are as undependable as intermittent streams, as the streams that overflow when darkened by thawing ice and swollen with melting snow, but that stop flowing in the dry season and in the heat vanish from their channels." And so what he says is, you were good for a little while, friends. You helped me out, especially Eliphaz. You were compassionate for a moment, but you're like an intermittent stream. I can't rely on you. You don't have no real compassion. You're not willing to just sit with my suffering. And then the next person comes out. The next person comes out is Bildad. And Bildad, he uses, he says, ask the former generations, ask the ancestors, ask the people that came before us. And so he wants to rely on tradition and the wisdom of the ages. And with the wisdom of the ages, will help them respond to theodicy, to resolve this problem of evil. But again, Job says, you're no help. You're not helping me. You're not helping me mourn and grieve and work through these problems. You're trying to find simplistic answers. And then the third friend, Zophar, comes out, and he cuts right to the chase. He just goes directly at him. He's the harshest. He says, will your idle talk reduce others to silence? Will no one rebuke you when you mock? You say to God, my beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight. Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you and disclose to you the secret wisdoms. For true wisdom has two sides. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sins. So you have so much sin in your life, Job. There's so much. You can't speak like that to God, and really comes after him and inflicts him. So each person comes out to Job in turn. Then they leave stage. Job responds to each one of them. And then that happens a second time. The second time, Eliphaz comes out, and then Bildad, and then Zophar. And then a third time. And each time you'll notice the speeches get shorter and shorter from the friends, like they're kind of wearing out, and they're kind of to the point where in the third round of speeches, Zophar doesn't even have the energy to talk anymore. He's given up on Job. He's so angry, he's so frustrated. And so again, it's a beautiful play. There's all this poetry and symmetry with how Job is there on stage, and the three friends come out one in turn. Eliphaz, then Bildad, then Zophar. Then Eliphaz, then Bildad, and Zophar. Then Eliphaz, Bildad, and then Zophar doesn't even come out the third time. Then there's a little interlude of Job just speaking about wisdom and how he understands wisdom. And then there's a fourth friend that comes out of nowhere, and he speaks. It's Elihu. Elihu has more of a nuanced approach. He says, on one hand, yes, God is just. He punishes the evil and does good to the good, and he is a just God, but we still don't understand how that all works. We still don't know how God does all that. We can't see the full picture. And so Elihu is different than the three friends. He's not angry. He's compassionate. He's speaking with wisdom, but he also speaks to the nuance of reality of life. He doesn't give simplistic answers like the friends gave. And what we see here is that those three friends are really speaking out of their own insecurities. They're speaking out of their own fears. That if a good man like Job could go through this suffering and lose his family and lose his wealth and his standing and his health, then that could happen to anybody. That then life's chaos and out of control, and we can't control God with our good works and our good life. And so they're speaking out of their fear, and Elihu seems to be different. He's not speaking out of his fear or insecurity. He's speaking out of wisdom. And so finally, Job appeals to God himself. Job wants to hear from God. He wants to go into God's courtroom, and he wants to enter into heaven itself and stand there in the courts of God and speak to God and call God to account. He wants to put God on the judgment seat. He wants to put God in the witness stand and judge him. Well, there's this, again, this is just a beautiful drama, a theater play you could see, because there's this cloud brewing in the background. And as the story goes on, this cloud is getting bigger and bigger until the cloud comes into center stage, and God speaks from this cloud. And God takes Job on this tour of the world, the deepest depth and the highest height, and all the different things that God is controlling and doing, and how all these things work together. And even today, with our modern day science, there's still so much we don't understand. How the bees interact with all of the rest of the world. If we lose bees, we lose pollen, we lose different plants. All the different systems that are working together, we're still trying to figure those out. And that's what God tries to tell Job, where, Job, you can't understand this. This is too much for you. And then we hear of the Leviathan, that this sea monster, this kind of that seems to be wild and fearless, and yet God tames and God uses, and that's kind of a picture of what God is up to in the world, and that God uses the chaos monsters of the world and the chaos and all the stuff that's going on, and he tames it and he uses it and he guides it for his own glory. So this is really, really beautiful, really, really challenging. But what I wanted to talk about is, I think, some of the main takeaways. One of the main takeaways is, if we want to help somebody in suffering, we need to just sit with them. In the midst of their suffering is not a time to try to figure it all out. And if you're trying to figure it all out in that moment of suffering, you're probably speaking out of your own fears and insecurities, your fears of death, your fears of chaos in your own life, the fears of failure in your own life, and you're actually not trying to help that person. So that's one really important thing. The next thing that I think is really important about this is the book of Job ends with Job receiving double of what he had before. And I think the point of this is that God has a plan. God's going to work it all out. God's going to use it all. God purified Job's faith. God strengthened Job's faith through the whole thing. God was going to use it all. Something else that's kind of interesting is that Job receives a double of all of his money and his flocks and his herds and all those things, but he didn't receive a double amount of children. He received the same amount of children. And I think that's supposed to tell us that when we lose a child, we actually didn't lose them. that they're with the Lord, and we will see them again on the last and great day of the resurrection. And that's really at the heart of this book, is that when we find real hope and real encouragement is in the resurrection. You see, when it comes to Hebrew poetry, usually the center of the poetry is the main point. And at the center of this poetic book is Job 19, where Job says, I know my Redeemer lives, and in the end I will see him with my own eyes. And so there is this ultimate hope of the resurrection of our body and the resurrection of our world. And we can live in that hope that God is working even things out right now. And life is going to be worked out. We're going to have hope right now. But ultimately, complete hope, complete reconciliation, complete healing at the resurrection because of the work of Jesus Christ. So what Job teaches us through this story doesn't come out and say it right away, but like you're watching a drama or reading a book. When you watch a drama in theater, when you're listening to Shakespeare and you're watching a play, there is a point that the author of that play usually doesn't come out and say it right away. You're supposed to understand the point by watching the play, by seeing the arc of the story. And I think when you watch the arc of this story, is that we can trust God. And we don't need simplistic, quick answers in the midst of our suffering to replace our trust. That even when we don't know the answer, we can still trust God. We can wait for his deliverance, and one day he will be vindicated. One day we will see that there is a good and just God that has allowed suffering for his own purposes, and at the end we will glorify him. And the secret is to glorify him right now in the midst of our suffering, to trust in him, and that's how you move through suffering. So I hope that helps, and I just want to keep encouraging you to keep reading your Bible, especially this beautiful book. If you have questions, put them in the notes or the comments below, and we'll keep responding to them. All right, God bless you. Keep reading, don't give up.